I knew something was wrong the moment the door didn't swing open all the way. It wasn't stuck. It wasn't caught. It opened just enough for my parents to slide through, blocking the rest of the doorway with their bodies, like security guards trained not to reveal what was behind them. That alone was unusual. Nobody stands in a doorway like they're protecting something unless they know you're not supposed to see it. If you're interested in this topic, hit like, subscribe, and type "interested" in the comments, and I'll give you a heart. Cold air hit my face, sharper than it should have been. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared at the ground, hands tucked into his pockets, shifting weight, like someone practicing discomfort. My mother looked directly at me, but only briefly, just long enough to release the sentence they had clearly rehearsed. "You're not invited. Go home." No build-up, no explanation, no hesitation. The words slipped out with the precision of a decision made long before I arrived. For 3 seconds, I didn't move. Not because I was shocked. Shock requires confusion. This was clarity dressed as cruelty. I waited to see if she would correct herself, if this moment was a poorly executed joke. But then I heard it. Laughter. Warm, familiar laughter. Not distant, not muted. Full energy. Not strangers, not neighbors. My people, my uncle, my sister. And then Noah, his voice distinct, unmistakable. The one person who told me earlier he was traveling out of town. He was inside. Everyone was inside. Everyone except me. Someone shouted, "To family!" from somewhere in the background. Glasses clinked. Another round of laughter followed. And not the accidental kind, the celebratory kind. There was music, movement, warmth, and I stood outside, shivering. The porch light flickered above us. It buzzed with a faint electrical tremor, like even the light understood this wasn't how families receive their own. I nodded. Not agreement. Not acceptance. Just acknowledgement. Then I turned around. Walked down the stairs slowly. Each step more final than the last. I reached my car, got inside, and shut the door gently. Not slamming. Not dramatic. Quiet. That kind of quiet is dangerous. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I didn't plead for entry. When someone delivers a decision that confidently, they aren't waiting for your negotiation. They are expecting submission. I didn't give them that. Instead, I opened my phone, scrolled to a contact, and made a call. Not emotional, not shaking, calm, instructional. The call lasted 34 seconds. Nothing more needed to be said. I set the phone down and waited. 20 minutes later, my screen lit up with my mother's name first, her voice shaking. "What did you do?" "They froze everything, accounts, access, everything." Screaming erupted in the background, chairs dragging, my father shouting my name like it was a threat. Then another call. Noah, breathless, panicked. "They're saying I'm getting audited." My partner pulled out. "I don't understand. Why would you do this?" I kept my voice level. "You all wanted one holiday without me," I said. "I gave you something longer." Silence. Thick, cold, real. That silence is what betrayal sounds like when it returns home. Not rage, not disbelief. Recognition. Because in that moment, every single one of them understood one thing clearly. They had excluded the person who had been protecting them the entire time. They didn't just close a door that night. They closed access. And I don't reopen doors that were shut purposefully. The screaming continued on their end. I hung up, not abruptly, just conclusively. Later that night, their calls stopped, not because the situation improved, but because fear replaced entitlement. They didn't expect silence to have consequences. But silence is where precision lives. And when someone tells you to go home, they're forgetting the truth. I was home. They were guests in a life I built. That night was not rejection. It was transfer. They chose a celebration without me. I chose a life without them. And the truth is, freedom doesn't come when people welcome you. It comes when they reveal what you were never meant to stay attached to. When people decide you no longer belong, they don't announce it. They adjust you out of their lives gradually. Like fading a photograph, instead of deleting it. Looking back, The signs were organized long before that door was partially opened. It began with small delays. My mother had always returned calls immediately, even when she was busy. Her voice used to come with grocery lists, neighborhood gossip, unnecessary details about neighbors' cousins. Then suddenly she began ending calls early. Not out of irritation, but out of efficiency. She sounded like someone who was rushing towards something else. And I was no longer the priority. My father stopped talking with the length he used to. He began answering things in half sentences. He would check the clock behind me. Not obviously, only when he thought I wasn't looking. He'd always listen to my work updates, even though he didn't fully understand what I did. Now he would nod, say, "Good, good," and find a reason to walk off. Not because he was busy, but because the conversation didn't include him anymore. Then came the silence between siblings. My sister had been overly affectionate since childhood. Too many emojis. Too many exaggerated reactions. Too many "tell me everything" voice notes. Suddenly messages became short, one-word replies, or none at all. When she did respond, there was distance in the tone. Like someone rehearsing detachment. These changes weren't loud. Loud would have been understandable. They were intentional. Then came the first real moment that didn't feel accidental. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. I arrived at my parents' house unannounced, which normally wouldn't be noteworthy. I had always been the person who could show up without asking. My father once said, "You don't need permission to come home. You built half of what's running here." That same man opened the door that afternoon with caution. His posture was stiff, like someone answering the door after hearing unexpected knocking. Inside, the dining table was completely covered, papers spread, highlighters open, receipts stacked, handwritten notes, and a seating list with pages partially folded in half. Their reaction was immediate. My father stacked the papers so quickly one sheet slid to the ground. My mother reached for her phone and flipped it upside down. Phones do not need to be hidden unless the content implicates the present moment. I asked what they were planning. My father said, "Just something simple." I asked if they needed help with Thanksgiving preparation, the same question I've asked every year since adulthood. My mother said, "We handled it this time." Without looking at me. Handled. They had taken something historically mine and turned it into private work. After that, both began speaking to me like I was an outsider, temporarily visiting instead of someone permanently belonging. My father mentioned his schedule, as though I needed justification for why his attention wasn't available. My mother asked if I had plans with friends, something she had never asked before. Normally, she would assume my presence automatically. That week, my sister posted a story celebrating family dinner night. And I wasn't in it. Someone commented, "Where's your brother?" She replied, "Busy." Busy is a placeholder word. Busy is what people say when truth will cause disruption. Then came the moment I stopped rationalizing their behavior. A photo on the kitchen counter, Thanksgiving mock table layout, 10 names visible. Mine wasn't there. That should have been enough. But betrayal rarely arrives alone. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a message that wasn't meant for me. It was meant for Noah. She thinks he still has no idea. This is going to be perfect. Perfect. Not necessary. Not complicated. Not unfortunate. Perfect. Perfect implies planning. Perfect implies enjoyment. Perfect implies the subtraction of someone is not only deliberate, but beneficial to the group. I didn't respond. I didn't ask. I didn't forward it back. People who think they are manipulating you become careless when you show no reaction. Then came the number, 25. It was on a shopping list. 25 place settings, 25 gift containers, 25 custom dessert jars, 25 printed menus, 25 napkins tied with ribbon. Our family is 26. People don't miscount by exactly one. Someone removed me mathematically long before emotionally. That night, clarity replaced confusion. Not hurt clarity. Hurt requires expectation. Expectation requires belief. Belief requires trust. What I had now was documentation. I wasn't being forgotten. I was being eliminated. and elimination suggests more value in absence than presence. That is the moment silence changed function. Silence stopped being something to fill. Silence became something to measure. I knew something was wrong the moment they stopped looking at me directly, not because they disliked me, but because guilt activates avoidance. And guilt rarely hides well. They had already rehearsed Thanksgiving without me. What they did not account for was this: exclusion is not humiliation. Exclusion is data, and data is extremely useful when used correctly. There's a moment when suspicion stops being emotional and becomes procedural, a shift where you stop asking, "Why are they doing this?" and start thinking, "Let me verify what they're already confident I won't discover." That moment came sooner than I expected. It began with a voicemail from my uncle. A voicemail not meant for me. He said Noah needed to explain the plan before Thursday. He didn't mention details, just the plan. Plans are intentional. Plans have structure. I replayed the message twice. Not for clarity, just to confirm tone. His voice wasn't worried. It was excited. Excitement around someone's exclusion is confirmation, not speculation. 2 days later, a screenshot arrived from someone who didn't want to participate in the secrecy anymore. It came without context. No explanation. Just an image. A new group chat. Named Thanksgiving 25. 25 participants. All familiar names, except mine. Scrolling through it felt like watching an event I funded emotionally, logistically, and historically, without being invited to witness it. Some messages stood out. "Let's keep this simple. He'll make it awkward. We deserve peace this year. One holiday where we don't have to deal with him. Deal with me. Deal." As though my presence was a burden they carried quietly. My mother wrote, "He's too much lately. Let's enjoy ourselves." Too much. The same woman who called me when the washing machine overflowed at midnight now found me emotionally inconvenient. The same woman who once told her friends, "I don't know what we'd do without him," had now decided they wanted to find out. People often say betrayal hurts most when it comes from those closest to you, but betrayal doesn't hurt when truth is ready. It clarifies. It organizes. It sorts. That night, curiosity replaced emotional response. I opened my credit statements not because I sensed fraud, but because I've learned families sign things assuming forgiveness will arrive before consequences. There it was. 3 open credit accounts tied to my name. 2 with balances. 1 recently activated. I didn't panic. I didn't confront. Confrontation gives people the chance to call your discovery an overreaction. Instead, I printed everything. Statements, transaction lists, approval signatures. Then I found something else. Backdated activity with my name typed where a signature should be handwritten. Sloppy forgery always reveals urgency. Meanwhile, Noah had repeatedly mentioned his side business being private. Private means untraceable. Untraceable means improper. I found receipts he once casually left printed in my car, things he assumed I'd never look at. And I remembered a conversation 6 months earlier where someone owed me a favor. A person who worked in the exact field Noah was hiding dealings in. Connections assemble themselves when you're no longer emotionally invested in protecting anyone. Within a week, I had screenshots, account records, voicemails, group chat logs, identity documentation. Every piece of their planning sat in a folder on my desk. They believed exclusion was a harmless social event. They didn't know exclusion has administrative consequences. When you remove someone who holds structure together, the structure collapses. Not through revenge, but through accuracy. Accuracy is a powerful answer. Accuracy has no apology attached. Accuracy doesn't yell. Accuracy verifies. I wasn't preparing to retaliate. I was preparing to finalize. My silence was not withdrawal. Silence was alignment. When they planned Thanksgiving 25, they thought they created peace. But peace isn't the absence of someone. Peace is the absence of consequences. And consequences were waiting, organized, documented, verified. All I had to do was wait for the correct moment. Because justice is rarely dramatic. Justice is scheduled. And they picked the date. People imagine justice as dramatic voices raised. fights breaking out, tears falling across hardwood floors. But real justice is quiet. It arrives like an unexpected calculation finally posted to an account that had been accumulating interest for months. The moment began the night they shut the door, not because of the rejection. Rejection is emotional, and emotion wasn't useful anymore, but because finality creates opportunity. When someone removes you, they also remove the expectation that you will protect them. I sat in my car and looked at the dashboard light reflecting against the windshield. A thin blue glow washed over everything, softening the night. My hands didn't shake. My chest didn't tighten. The ache I expected never arrived. Clarity took its place. I retrieved the folder on the passenger seat, the one containing everything they hoped I would never see. And I made 3 calls. No drama, no heavy breathing, no trembling voice. 3 short instructions to 3 different people. 1 call to the bank. 1 call to an investigator who already had paperwork waiting. 1 call to the person who owed me a favor, someone who had been waiting for permission to intervene. The calls took less than 4 minutes combined. When I hung up, nothing dramatic happened immediately. The night stayed calm. The wind brushed across the windshield silently. Leaves tapped against the ground. No fireworks. No instant consequences. Justice rarely moves theatrically. It moves procedurally. 20 minutes later, the first vibration came. My mother. She didn't start with questions. She started with panic. What did you do? They froze everything. They froze all our accounts. Behind her voice was disorder, furniture being moved, drawers being opened, feet rushing across tile. Then my father yelling, not at her, but into the air, as if volume could change reality. My mother whispered, "Why now?" That was the most revealing line. Why now? Meaning they already knew what existed. Meaning they expected me to never find it. Meaning guilt was not a surprise, it was an inconvenience. I didn't reply to her question. I didn't explain anything. I simply ended the call. Not aggressively, conclusively. 1 minute passed. Then Noah called. His breathing wasn't steady. He sounded winded. Like someone who had run toward a phone instead of walking. "They're saying I'm getting audited," he said. My partner pulled out. "They shut off the account. They're contacting people." He asked why. He kept saying the word why, as though the situation required philosophy instead of mathematics. I didn't raise my voice. "You wanted 1 holiday without me," I replied. "I gave you something longer." Silence migrated into the conversation like fog entering a room. He whispered, "You planned this?" "No," I answered. "You did. I just followed the paperwork." Then came the moment everything shifted. His tone changed, not angry, not pleading, just aware. Awareness is quieter than fear. Fear screams. Awareness whispers. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He didn't justify. He just breathed differently. Families rarely understand the value of the person who stabilizes everything until stability is removed. Best friends rarely appreciate loyalty until something shakes the foundation beneath them. After that night, the calls continued. Not from them, but from offices, agencies, and institutions handling the consequences their signatures produced. And I didn't intervene. People call intervention kindness, but intervention is often correction, and correction belongs to those who caused the imbalance, not to those who endured it. They thought exclusion was harmless. Exclusion is structural, because the person you remove may be the wall holding your ceiling in place. That night was not the collapse, it was the recalibration. And the difference is critical. Collapse destroys. Recalibration reveals. They thought life would operate better without me. They discovered life operated because of me, not loudly, not visibly, but foundationally. That night rewrote relationships, not through choice, through truth. The morning after everything unraveled, the silence was different. Not avoidance, silence. Not avoidance, silence. Not delayed responses or half conversations. This silence had mass, weight, substance. It wasn't that no one contacted me, they simply had nothing left to say that would benefit them. When a person believes you know less, they communicate freely. When they realize you know more, Communication dies. I woke up to 8 missed calls. None of them included apologies. None offered explanations, just timestamps of panic. By noon, the calls stopped altogether. Not because emotions settled, but because consequences continued without interruption. Their accounts remained frozen, paperwork processed uninterrupted, audits triggered escalations, partnerships dissolved, and silence replaced entitlement. They learned the difference between wanting peace and earning it. Nobody texts "we need to talk" when truth has already spoken. A few days passed before my mother tried again, not with an emotional appeal, but with logistics. "Do you still have the documents?" she asked. Not, "We're sorry." Not, "Can we speak?" Not, "How did this happen?" Just an administrative request. I didn't answer, not because I was angry, but because responses are currency, and silence was priceless. My father didn't call. He let silence speak for him. He had always believed time fixes things. Time doesn't fix deliberate exclusion. Time amplifies it. Noah attempted one message 3 days later. "Can we undo this?" Undo. As though consequences were a misplaced file that could be dragged back into the correct folder. Undo. As though trust is reversible. Undo. As though choosing to exclude someone is not a declaration. I didn't reply. Because once silence becomes memory, engagement becomes regression. The next time my mother called, her voice was smaller, not weak, just smaller, like volume naturally decreases when certainty collapses. She said, "You didn't give us time." That sentence told the real story. Time to do what? Time to hide documents? Time to withdraw signatures? Time to erase digital trails? Time to rehearse a story? Time to prevent accountability? You only request time when you know exposure arrived sooner than planned. I didn't argue. I didn't correct her. I didn't narrate what she already understood. Silence is acknowledgement. Distance is reply. Weeks later, I found myself not thinking about any of them, not intentionally, just naturally. Betrayal is loud when it happens, but becomes quiet once processed. It stops echoing. It stops demanding justification. It stops mattering. That's when I realized something important. They weren't grieving me. They were grieving access. Access to stability. Access to protection. Access to the person who solved everything before anyone else noticed anything was broken. Families often mistake loyalty for obligation. When obligation ends, loyalty becomes perspective. I started spending evenings alone, not lonely, just unburdened. Noise used to fill my house, phone calls about broken appliances, forgotten deadlines, arguments between siblings needing mediation. Now my silence belonged to me. There was no urgency, no emergencies, no emotional labor assigned by default. Freedom rarely feels like celebration. Freedom feels like nothing to fix. I learned something else. People don't apologize for betrayal. People apologize for consequences. But apology after consequence is request, not remorse. The distance that formed wasn't punishment, it was natural alignment. Everyone landed where they belonged. They had chosen every moment leading to that door. I simply recognized the ending. There was nothing left to repair. There was only release. And release is not abandonment. Release is clarity choosing its own direction. The morning after everything unraveled, the silence was different. Not avoidance silence. Not avoidance silence. Not delayed responses or half conversations. This silence had mass, weight, substance. It wasn't that no one contacted me. They simply had nothing left to say that would benefit them. When a person believes you know less, they communicate freely. When they realize you know more, communication dies. I woke up to 8 missed calls. None of them included apologies. None offered explanations, just timestamps of panic. By noon, the calls stopped altogether, not because emotions settled, but because consequences continued without interruption. Their accounts remained frozen, paperwork processed uninterrupted, audits triggered escalations, partnerships dissolved, and silence replaced entitlement. They learned the difference between wanting peace and earning it. Nobody texts "we need to talk" when truth has already spoken. A few days passed before my mother tried again, not with an emotional appeal, but with logistics. "Do you still have the documents?" she asked. Not, "We're sorry." Not, "Can we speak?" Not, "How did this happen?" Just an administrative request. I didn't answer. Not because I was angry, but because responses are currency. And silence was priceless. My father didn't call. He let silence speak for him. He had always believed time fixes things. Time doesn't fix deliberate exclusion. Time amplifies it. Noah attempted one message 3 days later. "Can we undo this?" Undo, as though consequences were a misplaced file that could be dragged back into the correct folder. Undo, as though trust is reversible. Undo, as though choosing to exclude someone is not a declaration. I didn't reply. Because once silence becomes memory, engagement becomes regression. The next time my mother called, her voice was smaller, not weak, just smaller. Like volume naturally decreases when certainty collapses, she said. "You didn't give us time." That sentence told the real story. Time to do what? Time to hide documents? Time to withdraw signatures? Time to erase digital trails? Time to rehearse a story? Time to prevent accountability? You only request time when you know exposure arrived sooner than planned. I didn't argue. I didn't correct her. I didn't narrate what she already understood. Silence is acknowledgement. Distance is reply. Weeks later, I found myself not thinking about any of them, not intentionally, just naturally. Betrayal is loud when it happens, but becomes quiet once processed. It stops echoing. It stops demanding justification. It stops mattering. That's when I realized something important. They weren't grieving me. They were grieving access. Access to stability. Access to protection. Access to the person who solved everything before anyone else noticed anything was broken. Families often mistake loyalty for obligation. When obligation ends, loyalty becomes perspective. I started spending evenings alone, not lonely, just unburdened. Noise used to fill my house, phone calls about broken appliances, forgotten deadlines, arguments between siblings, needing mediation. Now my silence belonged to me. There was no urgency, no emergencies, no emotional labor assigned by default. Freedom rarely feels like celebration. Freedom feels like nothing to fix. I learned something else. People don't apologize for betrayal. People apologize for consequences. But apology after consequence is request, not remorse. The distance that formed wasn't punishment, it was natural alignment. Everyone landed where they belonged. They had chosen every moment leading to that door. I simply recognized the ending. There was nothing left to repair. There was only release. And release is not abandonment. Release is clarity, choosing its own direction. Moving was not dramatic. There was no announcement. No final confrontation. No symbolic closing of doors. I packed my belongings one room at a time. Not because I was rushing, but because I was unlearning a life paced around other people's emergencies. Box by box, cabinet by cabinet, I sorted what was mine from what was tied to expectation. There were no sentimental items taken. Sentiment is heavy when attached to disappointment. I took essentials, documents, clothes, and anything related to legal existence. Everything connected to memory stayed behind. Good memories belong to past versions. Bad memories don't require movement, they follow if you allow them. I moved on a Wednesday afternoon, not a weekend, not a holiday. Midweek transitions don't leave trails. I loaded my car and drove across state lines, with a single bag on the passenger seat. The same folder, containing every piece of evidence that changed the dynamic forever. Not because I needed it anymore, I didn't, but because proof becomes symbolic once justice has already happened. When I got to the new place, the air felt different. Not cleaner, not lighter, just unoccupied. Silence didn't demand anything. There was no expectation to return calls. No obligations waiting. No familiar voices rehearsing disappointment. The first night, I cooked dinner for myself. Not for a group, not for anticipated company. Just one plate. A calm plate. No leftover containers prepared for anyone else's schedule. I sat down, ate, and realized nothing was missing. Solitude isn't absence. Solitude is ownership. In the weeks that followed, life stabilized not externally, but structurally. Sleep changed. Breathing changed. Space in the room changed. When you're used to being the family problem solver, your mind stays wired in expectation mode, waiting for the phone to ring, waiting for someone to need something, waiting for emotional emergencies disguised as practical requests. With distance, that reflex dissolved. Some people showed up naturally. New colleagues who saw value without extraction. Neighbors who didn't ask for help disguised as friendliness. People who invited without needing anything in return. I learned something new. Belonging isn't measured by how much you provide. Belonging is measured by how much someone keeps you present when they have nothing to take. Meanwhile, back where I came from, the fallout never really repaired. I wasn't tracking updates, but information travels on its own. People talk when imbalance becomes obvious. Accounts remained frozen longer than they expected. Audits expanded. Signatures were examined. Agreements unraveled, not loudly, not publicly, just structurally. They tried to stabilize without the person who used to patch every leak, and they discovered stability doesn't appear through apology, it appears through contribution. My absence was not an emotional decision. It was a structural correction. Sometimes, distance isn't separation. Sometimes distance is arithmetic, the subtraction required for balance. When I walked into that new apartment after organizing it, something unexpected happened. I didn't check my phone to see who needed something. I didn't feel pressure to reply. I didn't imagine I was forgetting a responsibility. There was simply nothing waiting. And that's when peace became clear. Peace is not calm. Peace is nothing required of you. They taught me that unintentionally. They removed me from obligation and revealed freedom in return. That new chapter didn't ask me who I was before. It asked who I wanted to be now, and nobody had the authority to interrupt that answer. People assume betrayal damages you. It doesn't. Betrayal exposes what was already unbalanced. It doesn't change who someone is. It removes the disguise that kept you believing they were something else. It took time before I understood that the night on the porch wasn't a breaking point. It was a reveal. Everything they did afterward wasn't a loss. It was information. Families like to pretend betrayal is complicated. It isn't. Betrayal is arithmetic. Remove the person who supports everyone, and observe what remains. If structure collapses, the structure wasn't built on love. It was built on dependence. There is a difference. Love sustains itself. Dependence collapses without the source. The distance made that clear. The further I got, the more the history reorganized itself. I remembered moments that didn't feel suspicious at the time but now aligned perfectly. How I became the negotiator when relatives argued. How I paid balances quietly and they celebrated publicly. How I solved problems they created but resented the reminder you helped. They called it responsibility. It was correction. They called it loyalty. It was unpaid labor. They called it family. It was service. The human brain protects painful memories by simplifying them. Mine finally stopped simplifying. I started seeing admiration not as appreciation but as expectation. Every compliment they ever gave me was phrased to maintain usefulness. You always know what to do. You're the reliable one. He fixes everything. Not, we're grateful. We see how you show up. We value who you are, even when you're not doing anything. There was never acknowledgement for presence, only acknowledgement for performance. Distance teaches this. When a person values you only for what you provide, they mourn the service, not the person. That is the difference between attachment and ownership. Some nights, when I sat alone eating dinner, I realized silence wasn't emptiness. Silence was relief. There was nothing waiting for me. No call scheduled to repair something you didn't damage. No emotional assignment disguised as obligation. No subtle guilt that arrives when you say no. People don't understand how exhausting it is to be depended on by those who never ask how you're doing. When I stopped being accessible, I learned how unnatural accessibility had become. Peace wasn't quiet. Peace was the absence of evaluation. Nobody watching what time I left work. Nobody expecting advice before considering their own decisions. Nobody assuming I would help even before I agreed. Peace is being allowed to exist without function. That realization wasn't painful. It was clarity. The break didn't hurt because truth doesn't bruise. Truth reorganizes. And betrayal simply pushes truth to the surface fast enough to force recognition. I stopped replaying that night. I didn't need to assign meaning to it anymore. Meaning arrived already formed. They didn't remove me because I was too much. They removed me because I was the one holding everything in place. They didn't want peace. They wanted relief from awareness. Awareness forces accountability. Eliminating accountability feels easier than practicing it. They didn't reject who I was. They rejected reflection, because sometimes your presence reveals the difference between what people say they value and what they actually maintain. Distance doesn't punish people. Distance shows who genuinely attempts to cross it. No one crossed, and that was the answer, not the wound. Starting over wasn't dramatic. It didn't come with declarations, resolutions, or symbolic closures. It came with small adjustments that became habits. I didn't wake up one day fully healed. I woke up one day without anything left to repair. The first sign that life had shifted was the absence of urgency. I no longer kept my phone face up. I didn't wake anticipating someone needed something. I didn't check messages before preparing breakfast. I didn't mentally prepare answers for problems that weren't mine. Life didn't suddenly get happier. It simply stopped requiring emotional labor. I began meeting people who knew me without a narrative attached. People who met me as I existed, not as the one who fixed things, paid for things, solved things, or mediated things. Conversations didn't begin with needs disguised as updates. They began with presence. At work, colleagues started inviting me to dinners I previously could never attend because family obligation always positioned itself as priority. Not through force, through expectation. Expectation is subtle, but heavy. With distance, I could choose what mattered, rather than respond to what demanded. I made friends whose loyalty wasn't tied to what I offered. They didn't need advice before making decisions. They didn't ask for emotional processing disguised as stories. They didn't need me to prove anything. I began learning that belonging is not being included in plans. Belonging is being remembered without prompting. At first, I hesitated when new people reached out, thinking kindness required something in return. But I eventually understood that reciprocity is natural when it's genuine, not assigned. Some nights were quiet, not in a lonely way, but in a restored way. I'd cook dinner, sit with the plate still hot, eat it while it was fresh, and realize how rarely I had done that before. My meals used to sit until after a crisis was handled, a phone call resolved, someone else's disappointment digested. Peace tastes different when you're not swallowing interruption. Days began to structure themselves around things I actually enjoyed. Books I wanted to read, not resources for other people. Projects I did for my own interest, not responsibilities passed down to keep everyone stable. Even silence had shape, not emptiness room. Then something unexpected happened. I laughed without permission, not because someone said something worth laughing at, but because there was space to feel anything without monitoring someone else's reaction. I realized I hadn't laughed freely in years, not because life lacked humor, but because humor becomes expensive when someone always needs something afterward. People assume starting over is loud. Truth is, starting over is quiet, because the noise belonged to what you left. I began building relationships where my presence wasn't evaluated based on usefulness, efficiency, or reliability. I met people who respected boundaries without labeling them as withdrawal, who didn't interpret silence as punishment, who didn't measure closeness by what they could extract. The most surprising part of new beginnings is not who arrives, it's who stays without needing a reason. One evening, sitting on my balcony, I realized something simple. Life didn't improve because my family was gone. Life improved because the version of me they depended on no longer existed. The version who negotiated peace before conflict escalated. The version who offered help before being asked. the version who forgave before accountability could arrive. He belonged to them, not to me. Now, belonging was built on reciprocity, not expectation. Contribution was offered, not assigned. Connection was mutual, not one-directional. Love wasn't requested, it was chosen. And most importantly, presence wasn't payment, it was identity. When people push you out, they expect you to wait outside. They expect remorse to make you knock again, hoping to be let back in. But distance recalibrates memory, and when you stop returning, the dynamic reverses. The first attempt didn't come through apology, it came through convenience. Months after I moved, my father sent a message, not handwritten, not thoughtful. Just a 9-word text. Can you look at something for me real quick? No greeting, no acknowledgement of silence, no admission of what happened, just a request. The same structure that defined years of interaction. He assumed access remained untouched. I didn't respond, not because I was punishing him, but because answering would have reactivated an old system I no longer belonged to. When the request received no reply, a different message came days later. This time, from my mother, we could talk sometime if you want. Not we need to talk, not I'm sorry, not we shouldn't have treated you that way. If you want, which means, but only on terms that cost us nothing. Silence was my answer. Weeks passed. Then I heard from someone who knew both sides of my life, someone who still attended family gatherings. They said, they keep telling people you disappeared. They're telling everyone you cut them off suddenly. Suddenly, that word marked their revision. Suddenly is a rewriting of events that were gradual, deliberate, documented. Suddenly erases their planning, suddenly protects their reputation, suddenly makes distance look like abandonment instead of consequence. I didn't correct the narrative. Correction is unnecessary when truth isn't seeking approval. Time distanced everything even further. One evening, my sister reached out, voice softer than before, not to apologize, not to reconnect, but because something in her life was collapsing and she needed help navigating it. Her message was disguised as vulnerability. I just want to talk. You always know what to do. Not I miss you. Not how are you. It was a reach toward the old version of me, the version who fixed everything, but access to that version expired. When I didn't respond, she followed up. So you're really done? Done. As though family is faucet-based. As though turning away is childish. As though silence makes me unforgiving. Being done is not abandonment. Being done is honoring finality. The final attempt came the way truth always returns, through an indirect channel. Someone forwarded me a screenshot from a conversation I wasn't meant to see. My family's discussion thread, not titled this time, just names and messages. He's being dramatic. He knows we didn't mean to leave him out. He should come around eventually. We're still family. The sentence that stood out was my mother's. We had no choice. Things were tense. We just needed space. Needed space. The exclusion wasn't presented as betrayal, not as planning, not as celebration without me. It was reframed as necessity. People tend to rewrite history around their own comfort, but distance has memory. Memory doesn't need correction. It sits, unmoved. When people returned, it was never out of accountability. It was never out of correction. It was because consequence removed convenience. The version of me that used to serve them was gone. So what remained was unfamiliar. And unfamiliarity makes people uncomfortable. They weren't asking for me. They were asking for who I used to be. The reliable one, the immediate problem solver, the quiet stabilizer, the silent provider. Once that role expired, their interest expired with it. That's when returning required effort. Effort never arrived. And that, more than anything, clarified what connection had actually been. Access, not love, not reciprocity, not family. Access. And access was no longer available. Closure did not arrive in a single moment. It didn't come through apologies, reconciliations, or emotional reunions. It came when I realized nothing remained unfinished. When people talk about moving on, they describe it as forgetting. But forgetting is not healing. You don't heal by erasing what happened. You heal by no longer needing it to define anything. For a long time, I thought betrayal created distance. But distance wasn't created, it was revealed. It already existed. I just hadn't acknowledged it. They had never really understood me, never really supported me, never truly included me. They had simply benefited from access. And when access was gone, connection dissolved. That's not loss. That's definition. Closure is clarity without resentment. It came gradually. It came when I could wake up without remembering that night on the porch. It came when eating alone didn't feel symbolic. It came when silence wasn't emptiness, it was space. And it finally arrived when I stopped expecting emotional accountability from people who never practiced it. I began building a life that wasn't a reaction to theirs. Decisions weren't avoidance-based. They were alignment-based. Not away from them, but toward myself. Towards people who didn't need performance. Toward environments that weren't transactional. Toward conversations not structured by obligation. The final realization came quietly. I didn't miss them. Not out of coldness, not out of bitterness, but because nothing valuable was lost. You cannot miss what never fully existed. Love without responsibility is decorative. Responsibility masquerading as love is exploitation. Once that distinction surfaced, the story ended. I no longer wondered what they were doing on holidays. I didn't track updates. I didn't replay events in my head. Their names stopped triggering memory. That's when separation became completion. Real closure is not forgetting. Real closure is knowing you would not return even if the door reopened. That night was not a rejection. It was release. They believed they removed me. They freed me. Because leaving is not escape. Leaving is alignment. And alignment is where peace lives. Peace does not ask you to explain your absence. Peace does not measure what you provide. Peace doesn't require service. Peace is when your presence belongs to you again. That was the ending. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just accurate. And accurate endings do not echo, they settle. And when a story settles, you no longer carry it. You simply walk forward, free.